It is 2023, and you, as a Rockwell Automation Product Security Incident Response Team member, receive a call from the government. We are from the government, and we really are here to help. What comes next will require you to rely on your vast 15 years of experience, from fighting fishers in 2005 to handling crises around the world in the U.S. Air Force. You'll be fighting against a clock and an enemy with very technical resources who only has one goal: to deny, destroy, and degrade a critical infrastructure. Hi, I'm Daniel Swan, Cyber Incident Commander at Rockwell Automation.
Hi, I'm Kate Vita, Director of Intel Research at Dragos.
All right, so we'll begin by going over kind of the notification process that we received at Rockwell Automation. We'll talk a little bit about the initial discovery that we went through once receiving this information. And then Kate's going to help out with some of the technical details and also some of the threat intelligence and some of the things that they were seeing in their products. And then we'll get into kind of our remediation plan, how that came about, and then also what the talk's really about is our collaboration efforts, some of the unprecedented actions that we took and the other vendors and the U.S. government partner took. And then lastly, we're going to give you some things that you can take away if you're using this equipment in your environments that you can use to implement better protection for that.
So a lot of things went on in a pretty short amount of time, but many hands make light work. So this timeline highlights key interactions between our teams and just different things that happened throughout this whole collaboration. And Daniel's going to talk more about the US notification because I wasn't there. But where Dragos comes in and where all the other vendors come in is when Rockwell called us and asked for our buy-in on this collaboration effort. And they told us they were intending to release an advisory in like a couple weeks. So once we agreed to play nice, we were told that here's what the analytics are, and here's a description of the vulnerabilities. So we got to learn more about the vulns themselves, and then we were able to use that to test against our data sets and figure out if we had exploitation in anything we could see. So next, we were added to a shared Slack channel, and this allows us to ask questions, communicate, talk with each other, ask questions to Rockwell. And this is unprecedented. For the first time, OT security companies, competitors, we had Google Mandiant, Tenable, Clarity, Dragos. I'm sure I'm missing some. Sorry, I'll list them again later. But so all of us were all in one Slack channel, communicating, asking questions, trying to figure out what the best possible response is for our collective customers. So the work that Maggie started is going to have a lasting impact for our community. So shortly after, we deployed our analytics to Neighborhood Keeper, and I'll talk more about that and analytics firing later. And then Rockwell shared a draft of their advisory, which allowed us to give corrections before publication, which doesn't happen very often. And then we'll talk about the big day, and that's about it. But so we basically had 2 weeks to figure out what's going on with this threat and what this collaboration effort could possibly look like together, all over like 4th of July week. So we were a little bit limited in availability. So Daniel, do you want to talk about what notification was like?
Yeah, so basically we were notified directly from the U.S. government. I'm pretty sure it was the guy on the screen there. I didn't see his face, obviously, but either way, we were notified directly. They called us and told us that they discovered a novel exploit being developed with whatever sources they have, and they really wanted to talk to us about it. So we kicked off a meeting with them. We got some initial information, technical information from the report. Some of it was still high level because of the classification and things like that. But either way, with what we initially saw, we knew that we had to act. So we assembled a task force. I'll call it Task Force Blue. It had a much cooler name, but I can't share it with you because it's, G14 classified. But either way, we had the task force. So this task force was quite comprehensive. We had our incident manager, Maggie Morganti. We had product security leader for the business unit that was affected by the module. We had several product security engineers, including on the PCERT team and then other folks within the company. Additionally, we had some security researchers, and we also had someone who's one of our principal embedded software engineers. He's been with the company 20 plus years. That's one thing about Rockwell. People stay a long time, which is great when you're dealing with problems like this, right? So he's been with the company a long time. He developed a lot of the firmware that goes in these devices. And lastly, we even called somebody who's been with had been with the company even longer out of retirement, put him on as a contractor. He was happy to go off the golf course, I can assure you that. But either way, he came in and took a look at screens for us to help us get some of the firmware updated that was going to be really old. So
Dragos also assembled our own team of experts. Most of them were vulnerability analysts, but we pulled people in from a lot of different teams because of the necessity of this. But our team's used to analyzing security vendor vulnerabilities and any sort of advisory because that's what we do every day. We make those corrections, but we don't normally have that opportunity before publication. So it's a really unique head start that we got on that. And then they also provided analytics, which we usually have to write ourselves. So it's cool to get a head start on that work as well as knowing and understanding the vulnerability. They also already had patches out, which we were able to analyze, and then they were given packet captures, which helped us test the analytics and make sure that the Dragos platform could see what we were trying to see. So all of it was really awesome. All of those artifacts help us understand the threat and also protect against that threat. So we were able to look and recreate that exploit in the lab, and that was how we could determine what it looked like for an operator. And really for every Intel product, we're trying to answer 3 questions. What is it? Why do I care, or do I even care? And what can I do about it? So all of these things help to answer those questions. So Daniel, do you want to talk about the impact of products?
Yeah, so if you look at the table here, we kind of go down the line. So the communication modules consist of 3 product lines, but I'm sure as a lot of you may know that use it, there's different versions, series that have come out over the years to handle different capability requests that were asked for, right? So if you look at this though, you'll see the first one on there is our first generation of the EN, and that's the EN2. This came out in 2007-ish, and it was the first generation. So if you're not familiar with these modules, a lot of times people will put these in legacy environments to enable Ethernet IP communication within that environment. Because sometimes it's a lot easier to do that than buy a new PLC that may be significantly more expensive that has an Ethernet port on it. So as you can see here, though, we gave it the CVE 2023-3595. And pretty much after initially looking at it, it was the worst case scenario. It basically allowed for remote code execution, privilege escalation, denial of service, and persistence. So when you're looking at a vulnerability, this was as bad as you could probably get when you're talking about this. So if you look at our EN3, which also has the same CVE number, it was similarly impacted, and it came out a few years after the EN2, so it's still very similar with a few more features. So unfortunately, also remote code execution, privilege escalation, and denial of service. Now, I think one of the bright spots that kind of came out, it just at the very early on part of the process that the team was really happy about, as happy as you could be in this situation, right, is our EN4, which is our newest generation. And as you can see, that was given a different CVE, so 3596. And the reason why is because the only impact that you could have on it was a denial of service. Now, I'm not trying to downplay that. I know that's still a big deal when you're talking about industrial environments and ICS environments. However, this module was developed after we had implemented something called design for security. Some people may call it secure by design. We call it design for security. But either way, that is based off of IEC 62443-4-1. And so as part of that, it has different built-in protection mechanisms that as long as you follow that when you're developing your firmware, it's going to help a lot. And so that was one of the bright spots. We had put this effort into making this product certified based off of that. It's audited by that. And then we kind of saw the fruit of that investment that we did so many years ago, right? To say, okay, well, at least we don't have the other 2 things attached to this vulnerability as far as the impact goes.
So now we want to see where are these assets? What is impacted? Who would be the target? Which industry might be the target? So at Dragos, we have a tool called Neighborhood Keeper. It's an opt-in, community-driven program where people can opt in to basically giving their anonymous data into one giant data set for us to get insights and report back out. So how it works, we have a Dragos sensor and site store. The sensor is collecting data off the wire, sending it to the site store, which is running analytics against it. And if you've opted in, that data gets scrubbed and anonymized and put into this other data set. So caveats of that data are sensor placement. We can only collect where you put it. And then customers get to self-select which industry they're in, what size their organization is, or they could just leave it blank. So it kind of takes it with a grain of salt. But we queried our data set looking for these vulnerable communication modules. We found the vast majority of them were in the manufacturing industry, followed by paper and pulp, oil and gas, chemical, and food and beverage. And you can see on there like little ones that I didn't label, but there's telecom, wastewater, electric. We actually have split up into transmission, distribution, and generation. And then we also had automotive in there and mining as well. So it didn't really narrow down the target because everyone uses these modules. So the target's anywhere, but the most important part is that we do have visibility. We can see these communication modules. So you want to talk more about the exploit?
Yeah, so we basically had two different CVEs issued, as I talked about a little bit earlier, but we had, basically 100+ years of experience looking at this as far as the team itself went. And honestly, they were shocked at the level of detail that the writer was able to come up with to figure this out. So in that situation, we issued CVE 2023-3595. And that one covered the EN2 and EN3, like I talked about earlier. And so basically what vulnerability was you could manipulate certain values in a SIP message in the firmware code, and then send that maliciously crafted message. And then once it executed, it would allow you to fully control the device. So once again, worst case scenario here, not good. And so that's why we worked so hard on the remediation and collaboration. So that was the EN2 and 3. And then for the EN4, you could also manipulate the values in the SIP message, but once you send it, it would take the device possibly offline, but no remote code execution or persistence. So it's much easier to get back on into operation if that happens. And so once again, our design for security based off 62443-4-1 really saved us here to making this a bad situation not any worse than what it was for the other two modules. So we're really thankful that was the situation here.
So imagine you're an operator walking around your plant and some adversary somewhere is exploiting these vulnerabilities in your environment. You likely wouldn't notice. The remote code execution, an adversary could just basically set up camp on the communications module, and there's like almost no reason for you to see that in any way. But what you would notice is if they started making changes to data points or tags or start spoofing SIP messages, and in that case, you're going to see the process impacts. You're going to notice those things first, and you're likely not going to say, maybe that was the vuln that Rockwell talked about a year ago. So it's not really high on the list of culprits if you were to see something like that happen. For the denial of service, it's a little bit louder, but it makes the communication modules look like a failed controller, or a failed communications module, which most operators are going to look at and either reset or replace, which you could do, but if you didn't address the initial attack vector, it could just happen again. So obviously this isn't the best or easiest thing to troubleshoot as an operator. As a lot of things are going on in the plant, this is likely not the top thing on their brains, but recognizing all of that, Daniel's team put in a ton of work and remediation to help prevent that sort of scenario from taking place.
All right, so let's talk about remediation efforts. So we did everything technically feasibly that we could. Like I talked about earlier, we brought in everybody to include the golf course. So it was really a great effort. But when it came out, we released security patches for 16 products total. Like I said, the 3 product lines there. The EN2 is 11, the EN3 were 2, and the EN4 was 3. And so one of the things that we did is we basically developed patches for all available lifecycle states that Rockwell has when it comes to firmware. So our limited, retired, managed, and preferred versions of firmware. And so in addition to that, one of the things that we did too was we made sure that we released an unsigned version of the firmware update as well. So we know that there's still people that may be running unsigned firmware for their controllers. We highly recommend that you upgrade to signed if you can, because that gives you a lot more peace of mind with security, right? For that firmware you downloaded knowing it's signed by Rockwell, and you don't have to worry about anything that could be in there that's not supposed to be. But if for some reason you can't, you're running unsigned, you can still download the security update to fix that firmware, even if it's unsigned. And then there was a lot of work that went into mitigation strategies that we developed and provided. And that's a lot of what we'll talk about with our collaboration efforts with all the vendors. Speaking of collaboration efforts, right? So, I mean, this is why we're talking about this. This is the big reason, right? So the title of the talk is how collaboration crushes threat actors' hopes and dreams, right? And that's what we all want to do in our space. We want to do it as the vendor. You guys want to do it in the assets you're operating, right? And then the OT detection vendors want to do it. That's what we're all here for. So it was really unprecedented. And I think one of the things was these out-of-band communication channels were set up pretty much as soon as we possibly could. A lot of the information that we passed and they passed to us for the government, we did over that, and until we had to have meetings in person. And so that really helped not only feed information in and out from us and everybody else, but it also helped everybody work off of each other's work, right? So there were no like, I'm like keeping my secrets or my precious here, right? Everybody was open, all the vendors that you see on this list, right? We're all open to working together to make sure that this thing was successful in protecting everybody, right? And so we develop these detection signatures between us and the government. And really the main reason why is because, like I said earlier, they couldn't share everything that they had. But what they could do is say, we'd give them a signature and they could say, yeah, that's great, it's gonna work, or nope, that's not gonna work, right? And they could say, maybe this would work, right? And so we had this back and forth, which is really great. And I'll talk a little bit about the private-public partnership aspect of that later. But this back and forth really helped to make sure that when we got ready to share these with everybody on our side between our product and the government, everything was working, right? So, and then after that, we took what we had and that we knew was going to work, and we shared that. And really, it was a huge win. We engaged Dragos, Clarity, Mandiant, Cisco, Talos, and Tenable in providing pre-release details of the vulnerability, but then also those detection signatures. Because we developed them, we tested them, we knew they worked on our side, but we also wanted to make sure that everybody had a little bit of a jump start. So when they put those in their product, whatever it is to protect you, right, that it was going to work and let you know if something was going on. And so that was really huge. And I think one of the best things that I'd like to see going forward when there's something that is this serious. So.
Awesome. And what we did with the analytics is we have a tool called the Partner Intelligence Exchange at PI. It's a part of Neighborhood Keeper and allows people to basically submit intel in the form of IOCs or analytics, in this case, snort rules, into the Neighborhood Keeper data set and then see whether or not it fired. So what we did when we deployed this after testing some, we ended up finding, I think it was after a couple days, 2 hits in a food and beverage instance. And it's like, okay, this is gonna be a whole fun day of triage, but why are they trying to attack our beer? Like, what is going on here? So trying to find the why was a little bit hard in some of this, but we determined that there were some false positives as well, but that allowed us to tune and then redeploy without alarming any customers, which made that really helpful. But the point here is, if we were able to see exploitation in the wild, that would change what the advisory says. One thing is saying, yes, we're vulnerable, we know someone's targeting it. Another is saying, is this actively happening? Come do something right now. So there's some really cool benefit to being able to do this and check against the networks and see and have that feedback loop. And then secondarily, a little bit of a peace of mind, because Rockwell's about to announce, yes, we have this vulnerability, and they recognize it takes time for people to patch or to remediate or to do anything, but at least we're monitoring and we can see if something like that is happening in the wild, and it's just really impactful for defenders. So you want to talk about the big day we've all been leading up to?
Yeah, so it was finally the big day, right? So 12 July 2023 is this when this was released. So there's a lot of excitement, a lot of anticipation from us and everybody that worked on it, because we were really glad to be able to tell everybody about it, right? So everybody, we finally had the baby, right? And so I think that, what was important here was that, as we talked a little bit, Kate talked about, those detection signatures were actually, had been tested and approved and everything, and they were loaded ahead of time, about 2 weeks ahead of time. And so if you're running one of these vendors' products, they were already in there and they were already looking. And so I think the main thing that we wanted to do to make sure of, and once again, this goes with, crushing those hopes and dreams, right, is we wanted to make sure these were in there ahead of time, because the last thing we wanted to do was say, hey, everybody, guess what? This is really bad. You should go patch your stuff, which we know an ICSOT isn't like, quick for some people, right? So at least when we came out and told everybody about it, the threat actor didn't go, oh, cool, everybody knows about it now, execute order 6.6, and then all hell breaks loose, right, with everybody. So we got these ahead of time. That way everybody was kind of used to it. The detection vendors already had them loaded. And so that way, as soon as you would ask your person a question, they could say, yeah, we've been looking at it last 2 weeks. You're good. We don't see anything that looks malicious or, obnoxious, right? So in addition to that, we wanted as much exposure as possible. We did not want this thing to just come out and then die on the vine. We wanted people to talk about it, honestly, which is kind of a paradigm shift for a lot of vulnerabilities. But I was happy that people were talking about it because that meant it was, being taken seriously. And so, the NSA cybersecurity director on Twitter and X posted about it. So that drove some traffic to the vulnerability advisory, I'm sure. And by the way, that's PN 1633, product notice 1633. And so, he talked about it, which is great because that means it's important if somebody that person is talking about it, right? And then there were several vendor blogs. And so those helped a lot too, because we know that, you may use certain vendors, but if you're in this space with security, you're likely going to read blogs and stuff like that to learn from them, even if you're not using them, because these are trusted names in our space that talk about security, right? And so that was a great win too, that was published out there, and we were all together when that happened. And last, we also made sure that there was a CISA security advisory release for this through ICS cert. And so, because we do know, and I've noticed working the PCert inbox for the last few years, people may not see our advisories, even though we send out emails and stuff, but I may get an email saying, hey, I saw the CISA advisory, can you answer questions about this? So it's really important that CISA got involved too. And they were a great help in putting that out because they're, the word gets out even greater then. So. All right, so we're going to run down the mitigation strategies. And so I think one of the important things here is that there was a lot of time and effort that went into developing these. As a vendor, we could all do better with given mitigation strategies, and we try to do our best. But this one particularly had some great stuff in there. So make sure you read the advisory if you have this in your environment and it hasn't been patched. But speaking of that, the first thing you do is apply the patch if you can, right? I know that that's not always possible quickly, but get it on your maintenance schedule somewhere so that you have a plan for it instead of it just being unplanned and keeps getting put on the back burner, right? Because you can't stop production. So make sure you apply the patch. Also, secure configuration. And in this case, we're talking about accessing your comms module by an unauthorized party. Make sure you have things set up in your OTS, ICS network segmented so that doesn't happen if it shouldn't. And I think one of the things that was really great, and there's very detailed instructions in there in this, is how to restrict some of the functionality of this vulnerability, right? And what that comes down to is if there's SIP objects that are unused that you don't need, or if you don't need SIP objects at all, just disable those until you can apply the patch. Because that was a lot of, that's obviously the method that they went through. So if you can disable it, that's going to save you a lot of frustration until the patch is applied. And then also, whatever tool you're using, make sure you're monitoring for the exploitation attempts. There was a lot of work put in the detection signatures, snort 2 and 3. And so make sure those are in there because you want to be able to see any anomalous SIP packets that are coming through your environment. They're going to look different than other stuff, most likely, with values and stuff like that. So make sure that's in place so you know when it's happening. And then also you want to make sure that your network level protection, so higher level, your IT and OT networks are not talking so that SIP-enabled devices are not going to reach outside your IT network most of the time. There may be special cases where you need to do that, right? So, and I think the other thing is, Kate talked about what your operators should see, right? And we've had a lot of great talks, over this time, this last day, just day in yesterday, right? And there was a talk about, getting your operator ready. This is something that you can do, right? Educate, inform your operator or your users, right? So just give them a rundown on what it should look like or what it's not going to look like if it's actually happening, right? Kind of doing that talk that he talked about earlier, right? At the stand up of the shift and stuff like that. Either way, let everybody know what they should or shouldn't be seeing in this case so they're prepared if something bad happens. All right, so let's give you some stuff to take home when it comes to our talk and our product, and then some stuff that Kate's brought up as well. So number one, prioritize patching it, right? So schedule it, live it, love it. Just get this thing done, get it scheduled so that you're going to be well protected. And then, like I said, collaboration and sharing this information pre-release when you can is key. It's not always possible due to legal and regulatory reasons to do that, right? But in this case, it was so severe that we felt like this needs to happen, right? Everybody needs to know about it so that we're all on the same page. Because whether it's the OEM, the OT detection vendors, or you guys as the asset owner operators, we're all here to protect the world, right? I mean, that's what we do. We're in life safety, program structure. So, everybody needs to be on the same page if possible. And that's really what happened here and what this collaboration can show going forward, what you could do to protect everybody. And then if you're in our space as an OEM, you can and will be targeted. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I think the last few years of any news site has told you that nobody's immune to a threat or looking at them to try to go after their customers, right? So, and then, this one is near and dear to my heart. Number 4, public-private partnerships, because I was in the, military I'm still in the military, but as a reservist, but for a long time. And it's a rare opportunity when you as a government person gets to talk to the private, people and actually help, right? And give them information that they can use and that's actionable, right? So there's a lot of regulations that are written up and stuff like that, which are helpful. And I felt like talking about how the energy sector work is great. And so, seeing it from both sides of working as the government and then, from this side as the private partnership, private company, it was really great and key to make these things safe for everybody, right? Okay.
And if you have your things, any sort of OT equipment still on the internet, the best time to have addressed that was 15 years ago. But the second best time to address that is today. So please get your stuff off the internet. And lastly, defense is doable and we can all work together. So let's go work together. Thank you.
All right, so we got 50.